Maybe this won't be a bad year in the world of sports after all. And yes, I know that this is the news show, but definitely I was checking out that my alma mater, Marquette, went and not only beat a top ranked opponent, but actually kind of destroyed them. So that actually made me have a good day early on in this day because I am a proud Marquette alumni and all of that. And I saw that we beat Baylor by some ridiculous score like 96-70 or something like that. So that was definitely some good news. I know that folks have been speculating that we will not be that strong in the Big East, but in that Big East Big 12 battle, and of course it was on the home court, we managed to win that game 96-70. So that is a good thing. Doesn't mean that we'll do all that great in the conference. We'll just have to figure out how that plays out and what goes on in that space. But that has put a smile on my face early this morning. Other things that are going on in life may not be putting as much of a smile on the face because people are going through hard times and other things just in life in general. But definitely put a definite smile on the face and glad to see that happening. And I just brought that up at the beginning, but there are other more important things that are going on in the world. But hey, I can have a little bit of fun at the beginning. I've got another sports related story that I'll bring up at the end before I bring on Dan to talk about what's going on as well. But Trump called McConnell a loser after he condemns the Fonte's dinner and all in that space because apparently McConnell was saying that that was not cool to be inviting Fontes, who is known as being a very much of a activist in that white supremacist kind of space and all of that, and also Kanye West, a well-known rapper and sometimes folks that have respect for in the African American community, and a lot of people that don't have respect for him in that community as well. But they were having dinner, and that has given some people pause and all in that kind of conversation. And definitely, Trump's in the middle of a campaign now, so we'll find out whether that impacts his campaign or doesn't impact his campaign. And speaking of things that are being impactful, clashes in Guangzhou are going on as China tries to quell COVID protests. So yes, over there in China, there are people that are not liking the policies that are going over there as well. And even in India, a newly unsealed affidavit details the clues that lead investigators to the suspect in the Delphi teen girl killing and all in that space. And that was actually not there in that part of the world that I was saying. It was in, if I'm remembering correctly, but I'm going to check that and all in that line. But the other thing that is a lot of folks are going to be paying attention to, because some people are glad and some people are saying that it was a convoluted message. But apparently there is a Senate bill that has passed that is the same-sex marriage bill, and it passed with bipartisan support. Sometimes folks are glad about these things, sometimes folks are not glad. And of course, some people were wondering about other parts that were included in the bill, because as I recall, and I'll double check this, and Dan might have some thoughts about it as well, I think that there were some freedom of religion incidences that were also placed in that story as well. So definitely there was some people that wanted other things and put it in that. And by the way, Indiana and India are totally different, and that's where that particular shooting went and all in that space. So let me just make that correction, since that's what happens sometimes during the news when you're excited about your sports team winning and all in that line. But that being said, and all in that way, the same-sex bill will be interesting. And I do know that there were efforts to make sure that religious rights were also put into the bill as well. And definitely folks should have the right to practice their religions, whether they be a Christian of the Islamic faith or a number of other faiths that exist out there, even some folks that might be doing some new age kind of religions as well. So definitely I know that that was part of the conversation that folks were having as to some of the things that were included in the bill, but that happens with bills in general. They will add other things, and then people either are happy about that or they are unhappy about that, depending on their thoughts and what is happening in that regards. But coming back to that Indiana case, not India, but Indiana, a 40 caliber unspent round that was found near the bodies of two teen Indiana girls was tied to suspect Richard Allen, who was arrested last month in connection with the killing, according to a probable cause affidavit. The affidavit, which was unsealed by a judge on Tuesday, helped shed light on how investigators narrowed in on Allen and arrested him more than 5 years since the February 2017 slaying of Abigail Williams, who was only 13 at that time, and Liberty German, who was only 14. Allen is charged with 2 counts of murder and is pleaded not guilty. So we'll find out how that goes in that particular case. And I do have much respect for officers of the law, having some of those in my own family, including some that have been involved in cases down there in Georgia and other places as well. So definitely much respect for the officers and hope that they are going to get to the heart of this whole case, and definitely the people that have committed the crime will be brought to justice and all in that space. But definitely have mad respect. I was actually just talking about my cousin Jonathan earlier because he's actually just got back to Georgia. I think it was yesterday when he was supposed to have been going back for a party of some sort. I think it was a birthday party of a friend and all in that way. But he just made it down because unfortunately there's that thing called car trouble. And yes, car trouble got in his way. And speaking of troubles, and then I'm ready to bring up my panel and all in that line and see if anybody else shows up as well. But Representative Jeffries, and I've said that I have met him only briefly, I think we've met twice now, is expected to replace Nancy Pelosi as the top elected Democrat. And that should be taking place on today. Today is Wednesday, so that should be taking place uh, later on this afternoon. And in other news, South Korea is scrambling jets as China and Russia warplanes are entering the air defense zone in that part of the country. And of course, we may get to things around what is going on in the Ukraine also. But Oath Keeper leader was found guilty of seditious conspiracy in the January 6th case. So that was something else that I saw in the news from the fine folks over there at Fox and all in that line. And arraignment is set for the former DA accused of meddling in the Ahmaud Arbery case. So that case is still in the news as well. And definitely it looks like Biden might be trying to buck folks. So apparently he's got labor allies, and apparently he might be trying to buck those allies in trying to find a way to divert a rail strike, which could be problematic for the world and all. And well, not so much. Well, yeah, you got to get the goods to the world, so it could be problematic for the world as well. So we're going to see what happens with that rail strike. And of course, I might come up with some other news stories that folks will be interested in. And I'm sure that Shaquille's got things that he wants to talk about as well. And by the way, just in the world of science, apparently we found some new minerals. New minerals never before seen on Earth were discovered in a massive meteorite. So that just recently took place as well. And definitely one of the leaders of China has passed away. Jiang Zemin, former leader who paved the way for the rise of China in China, has passed away at 96. And the French baguette was voted onto the UN World Cultural Heritage List. Yes, there is a World Culture Heritage List. I've got to find out what else is on that list. It's probably full of all kinds of interesting things. And Shaquille might even have some thoughts around a World Culture Heritage List and what should be on there or not on there and all in that list. And what I promised Dan I would do at the beginning, and that's what I'm going to do right now, is I started off with sports. I'm going to end with sports as well. Because apparently Biden was trying to prove that he is still fit because he got all excited and all enthusiastic because he rushed back on stage at an event that he was at to grab the microphone and tell a Michigan crowd that the U.S. men's soccer team beat Iran. So I guess he was at a speech, he was doing the speech and all of that. And then he just rushed back because he was all excited. I guess he was trying to show that one, he is a fan of the USA, and two, that he can still run because apparently he ran back and all of that space and then was like announcing to the folks that the U.S. beat Iran in that pivotal match that got the U.S. to go to the next round because you had to go to the next round and you had to win in order to go to the next round. So it was a pivotal match and a critical match for the U.S. in that space. But I'm picturing the 80-year-old man and particularly our illustrious president making this dart and this dash to get to the mic and say, to the crowd there in Michigan, USA, 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 and just get all excited in this matter of patriotism and all of this. So Shaquille, I'm going to toss it to you. What do you think Biden was trying to do? He was showing his athleticism by apparently was at a speech or something he had going on, and he went back to Secret Service or somebody told him what had happened in the game, and he got all excited and he ran back to tell the audience that the U.S. won and all of that. So I'm picturing him running back and all in that space. But what's your thoughts about Biden trying to show that he is a man of incredible virile and that he can just run back to there at all in that space? So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, first of all, you said you were going to finish off with sport, and you're telling me about your president running back on stage. I don't think your president would know the difference between soccer and ballet. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure that he even knows what actually happened. You know, the Secret Service probably had to give him some cards. Look at Nick. Nick's shaking backstage. But the thing in your open that I actually want to would love to have a bit more of an explanation on while Nick tries to recover is did I hear you say there is a activist in the white supremacy space and all along those lines? What exactly is the white supremacy space? Because it seems to me, not being American and watching your dysfunctional country from afar, that there seems to be about as many white supremacists as there are people that don't agree with the Democrats. So is it just simply a matter that if you don't agree with the Democrats, you're a white supremacist? Is that why Jatovy pulls back? Jatovy, I hope you're watching Jatovy because I talk about you a lot these days. Is that why Jatovy, when he sends his comments in, pulls back on actually calling me a white supremacist and instead says, you're repeating the lines of white supremacists? You're right. Is that what's going on here?
No, in this particular case, Mr. Fontes has said some very interesting things about, the Holocaust, and apparently he's a denier of that. He said some very interesting things
about...
as
Whoopi Goldberg said, most of the people that died in the Holocaust were white.
Why should they care, right? That's their line.
That was Whoopi Goldberg's point, and for the record, that's not my opinion. I think that what happened during then was a great tragedy of human history and should never ever be repeated. But what are we talking about here? I think we're living again in this sort of la la land of American utopias and American, getting upset about things. And Americans' propaganda. What we have is transitory inflation after the world has warned them that, look, inflation is not going to be transitory if you spend trillions of dollars. In fact, you're going to cause inflation to last, not just in the United States, around the world. That happens. And then they say, well, maybe we got our numbers wrong, but it's not going to cause a recession. Oh, well, a recession just happened. Well, it's not really a recession. It's something else. And now we have Joe Biden, the great athlete, the great Tom Brady. The Tom Brady of Washington, D.C. is Joe Biden. After Amber Heard lost her case, all of a sudden they tried to do a puff piece on her.
No, hold on a second.
She's the most beautiful woman that history has ever produced. If you objectively look at who she is the most beautiful woman, but she's white. So when a few black women said, hang on a minute, how can the most beautiful person be white? The story just kind of died out. We had our good friend Rick Rosner, talk about misogyny around that case. And then all of a sudden when I said, well, if she had won, she would have made tens of millions of dollars and she would have been a superstar. Maybe that was her motivation after she shat in the guy's bed. Real keeper there. And all of a sudden, okay, we'll just change our minds. So yeah, I believe exactly 0% of what I'm hearing, Mark.
Well, I hear you believe in 0%, and we're going to get to some of the other comments that other people might have, including Dan and our illustrious founder of this network, Nick, who has joined us as well. But, there's another person that got into a little bit of trouble.
I don't know how much of this show Nick's going to be out of the handle. Put the coffee cup down, Nick.
Because there's another. Well, speaking of cups and things that are in cups, apparently, a certain political and to a degree, and even though he's never ran for office, I don't think you got to run for office to be political. But a certain business figure has gotten himself in trouble from my fine folks, the liberals, because apparently Twitter CEO Elon Musk's Diet Coke tweet has sparked strong reactions from liberals in the media on yesterday, who found a deeper meaning behind the billionaire's favorite drink. So they were trying to interpret what this meant and everything, because he tweeted out a picture. He tweeted out a picture of his bedside table with several Diet Coke cans, a pair of prop guns, a Buddhist symbol, and a painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware River. But for some on the left, the soda. Notice I said the soda. Nothing about the Buddhist symbol, which is a religious symbol. Nothing about George Washington. Not even the pair of.
I think hold
on a second. Apparently, the image was the drink, and I'm trying to get to what they're saying about the drink, because he then followed it up with a confessing that there's no excuse for his lack of toasters, and by calling himself Elon Musk. But for some liberals, reacted to the tweet by making cult comparisons and berating the CEO for having poor taste. As a matter of fact, Hollywood composer, and then definitely want to hear from you.
You've read enough of the article. I think there
probably
is an undercut.
Hold on. I never read it. I'll switch it back to the Republicans, because you have said, when we have talked about the Republicans and what conversations were, that apparently we did the same, meaning the liberals, because that's why I was going to the quote. Because Hollywood composer Sean Patterson crazily responded, "How shocking! The richest man on the earth is a effing," and you know what effing stands for, trailer park simpleton. So that's
I'll say this. Sorry, Dan. Who the hell's that guy to have an opinion? We don't care. We don't care.
No, Dan, because you're white, you don't understand the deeper connotations here, right? So Nick held the can up. Nick held the can up, right? And although it's silver, right, it could look white. And here you have a white can inside of which there is, a black syrup with bubbles in it. I'm sure that there is some racial connotation to this. And as Mark said, well, the liberals got upset, they got offended, and they also don't. But it doesn't take much, really. It doesn't take much to upset the liberals that Dan loves so much, that Mark loves so much. It doesn't. Anything will upset them.
A bunch of babies.
So I think that might have been what has actually
no, but I mean, wait, y'all got mad when certain other people used the trailer park comparison, and now we use the trailer park comparison, and you're just
no, Mark. When I get mad when somebody tries to tell me, a person of color, right? Not that I identify myself that way, but you guys like to, because you're into labels and that, right? When you guys try to tell me that some white kid living in a trailer park, that you Americans go, look at this white trash, this trailer park trash, right? And you say these horrible, terrible things about people that are just trying to survive and hoping that their children will have a better life, right? You'll say, well, they're white. They've got privilege. And in fact, even if you were to compare them to a black child of a black athlete or an actor, compare them to Will Smith's kids, they've got advantage. They've got to check their privilege, because Will Smith's kids, they're not privileged. They're not the upper class of American society, not at all. Right? Shaquille O'Neal and his children, they're not the upper class of society at all. They are oppressed because of the color of the skin, and the people oppressing them are those toothless deplorables that live in trailer parks.
Those trailer park trash.
By you liberals as being
now,
white trash.
I'm deeply offended by this conversation.
Don't you start getting offended, Dan.
Can
I have Dan offended? Can I have this whatsoever and everything?
My parents.
Shaquille made Dan offended. That's not hard.
Who were poor. The only thing they could afford and they owned was a trailer. I grew up in a trailer. It was a nice trailer. And, I had told you about my mom refused to have me aborted. All this other stuff, the courage. My dad was a factory worker. He worked hard. And, so to besmirch people who live in trailers is wrong. I mean, it's as bad as racial comments. It's wrong. It's divisive. It's mean-spirited, and it needs to stop. Okay, because there are honorable people who are doing their very best, who are suffering and don't have this quote-unquote white privilege everything they have. They just are existing and trying to do their best. And it's a number of Americans that have to go through this. So for you elitists to come on and besmirch people who live in trailers. Now, so one of the richest people in the world decides he wants to drink a Diet Coke. I don't give a shit. The guy isn't he biracial anyway?
No, he's African.
There's whole
conversations about whether he's African American or not African American. Because I heard this argument where he's from South Africa.
You want to go to the trailer park
for a second? Let me come back to the trailer park trash thing. To this for a sec, right?
Yeah.
So you Americans are so, and I won't say all Americans because obviously Dan doesn't do it, right? But your side of politics in America is so quick to condemn those people, call them names, make fun of them if they don't have great teeth, make fun of them as being deplorables, etc. And then when I, on the other side of the world, say, hang on just a minute, I would like to see people have more opportunities to get out of poverty. You turn around and say, no, the only people you can help are people of color because the white kids growing up in trailers, they've got white privilege. Now, Dan's just actually told us a story, which I don't think he's told us before. I didn't know that about you, Dan. How do you respond to that? I don't think that Dan's a bad person. And just like you, I disagree sometimes with some of the political positions and moral positions that Dan takes. But Dan and I are still great friends. So why is it okay for you to try to favor one group over another because the Democrats tell you to? Why is that okay?
Well, a couple of things, Shaquille. One, I did not know that about Dan either, so glad to know that. And definitely I've oftentimes talked about growing up in a rural North Carolina area, and I told y'all that's actually where the term environmental racism came from and everying. And definitely, racism. Well, I'm just saying that's where the term came from. You can look it up in Wikipedia.
Do you think that the white trash living in those trailer parks, do you think that they might have experienced large corporations not giving a shit about them and putting toxic materials in their neighborhoods and in their areas without caring about what the effects would be on their children and on those families?
Well, it comes down to naming.
Justice, if you're ever going to talk about justice, let's talk about the West Memphis Three for a moment. Okay? The West Memphis Three living in Little Rock, Arkansas. Right, we've got a 16, 17, 18-year-old boys that were accused of murdering 3 boys. Now, these kids are all white. The 3 boys, the 3 8-year-old boys that were accused of murdering were white. These 3 boys were white. And basically, these, Mark, Nick, you all say I'm Mr. Christian Conservative over here. Heaven knows why you think that about me. The Christian conservatives in the south of Arkansas decided that because these kids liked listening to Metallica, they read the lyrics of Metallica and said, well, they must be Satanists, and convicted them. No forensic evidence, no eyewitness evidence, absolutely nothing. And they convicted these 3 kids. 16-year-old got life plus 40 years, 17-year-old got life, and the 18-year-old got the death penalty. Do I hear any comments about that from the black community? The people of color, people who are so concerned about justice and the injustices that occur in an imperfect system. Do I hear anything about that? No. And in the end,
one case versus 10,000.
20 years in jail.
Oh, come
they
on,
all had
Mark.
to take the Alford plea to get out. But you know what? Who cares? Because it's white trash. Those people don't matter.
No, first of all, anybody said it was white trash.
That's a real tragedy. And that
look, they were listening to Metallica. I mean, to me, it makes sense.
Our judicial
come on, Shaquille. They weren't listening to classical music. Okay.
Yeah.
They weren't trust fund babies.
Nick, where the racism really occurs. The racism occurs not when somebody wants to sit there and say an injustice has occurred, regardless of skin color, an injustice has occurred and we need to deal with it. The racism occurs when certain people will say, well, I am a person of color and the injustice has happened to somebody who is not a person of color and they should just suck it up because 200 years ago something happened. Right.
Hey, Shaquille, can I ask you a question?
It up, Buttercup.
Shaquille, hold on a second. Can I ask you a question?
Let Dan, before you ask me a question, I'd like Dan's response because I'd like to know whether Dan mostly agrees with
let's hear Dan.
Yeah, Dan.
Right.
You know, I think that as Americans, we should strive for a more just society based on the principles of liberty and freedom and the pillars of freedom, which included an explicit connection between rights and responsibilities that is inherent in our constitutional system. It depends on the public virtue, the goodness of people. What we're seeing today is corruption at the highest levels of government, the corruption at the highest levels of federal law enforcement, corruption in our political halls everywhere around the world, corruption in our corporations, and trying to remake our society, our culture, destroying our fundamental liberty values as Americans. Black Americans are traditional values are racist. They aren't racist. Good people everywhere benefit from the traditional values that America is all about. Most people that I've known, black and white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever, all share a core understanding of goodness and right and wrong. And I think that we need to get the politicians away from self-inurements and corruption and padding their pockets and getting rich on the American people, including the President of the United States and his family, so that they take the money out of it, because that's what's killing our country, is the corruption and influence that's causing all these great disasters. I often look at the United States government and shake my head and said, this freaking doesn't make any sense. And these people obviously have no common sense. This is what Trump was saying, right? Now Trump is no poster boy for good behavior. So I that's the first thing I'm going to say. But what he did say is, when I look at government, it doesn't make any sense. It's not doing the people's work. It's not making America great again. And what he tried to do is focus on those things and values that did that. And by the way, Mark, Trump did a lot of good things. He was called a racist and all this. No one ever called him that until he was president. And he did a lot of good things for the black community, Mark. I know you're looking like askance. The grants
I did not say he did not do good things.
You've never said that Trump hasn't done bad things. Dan, I want to ask you. I've got to ask you a question. You said that you often look at the American government and shake your head. I think the question I'd have for you is: has there ever been a time under Democrat or Republican rule that you've looked at the American government and not shook your head? Like, because I look at governments in every country that I'm aware of and go, huh? What are you doing? What? So that would be my first question to you, Mark. Go on, have a response for us. Nick's not
I had a couple of questions based on what people were saying, and I was also going to give a definition because it does tie into classism and all in that space. But
we're gonna switch. I'm not
going to totally switch. I'm going to respond to what Dan said and everything, because my question is actually tied to what Dan said, and I was going to loop back to what I was saying the first time.
If you're going to switch from race to class, is that a concession?
Mark, you have to do you have to provide the answer that Shaquille wants you to provide.
No, not at all. Not at all. I just want to clarify.
But if you don't, Shaquille will tell you what your answer should be.
I want to clarify for myself and for the audience. If you are switching now from race to classism, is that because you lost that particular debate?
No,
is that because at Dan's point
I did not lose that particular debate, but I said before, and I will say it again: the two are interlinked. Racism and classism are interlinked; they are tied together.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, Mark, I actually don't know quite how wealthy Nick is, but arguably he has probably got as much as I've got. Maybe I've got more. Maybe he does. We don't know. Right?
I know I don't.
Well, I'm broke too, according to the tax files. What I tell the tax department is that I'm broke.
Send money, Shaquille. I'm broke.
Nick is actually a trust fund baby. I'm not. So, Mark, when we talk about classism,
okay, wait. There's nothing wrong.
You've got yourself, Mark. You've got me. You've got Dan. We're all on your side.
It just is what it is.
Let's have at it. Let's tell Nick all about it. I want to hear it.
Situation.
I love the way that you're talking. Like
funds are bigger than others. I mean,
some people
gets out on this. Some trust funds are bigger than others.
Direct conversations. I'm not going to fall for those kind of red herring conversations and everything, because there can be red herring conversations and all in that space. But the question I was going to ask, and this is for everybody, including Nick, is I hear what y'all are saying, and you say sometimes, Shaquille, that I live in this utopian world or this utopian dream world.
Yeah, land.
La La Land, utopia, whatever you want to call it. But would you acknowledge that in the corporate boardrooms there are still, in the year 2022, severe disparities in the way that the corporate structures are put out there, and therefore the level of the playing field is something that needs to be done. And that's what I've said all along, because until we actually get more African Americans in leadership positions in some of these corporations and everything, that is an actual issue. And to come back to Will Smith, because you brought up Will Smith earlier, Will Smith is a whole different ball of wax. Will Smith got all kinds of issues going on, everything from that thing that he had with Chris Rock and the slap and the whole alopecia conversation, and whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, or whether it was staged or not, because a lot of people think that that was a actual staged event to get both of them publicity and all of that. And also we've got the whole concept of his to come back to the same sex thing. You know, he's got his daughter that changed and all of that stuff. I think it's a daughter that's a son, or a son that's a daughter. I get confused which way it went, but definitely they've got that whole thing going on as well.
Well, let's stick to your boardroom conversation. Right, let's stick to that just for a moment. So, I'm in finance. We all know that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I actually started off in insurance, not because I wanted to, but because when I went to get my qualifications, I had to do insurance, general insurance, before I got my qualifications to trade futures contracts and all the other fun stuff that people with balls actually do. That was my opinion at 17, 18, when I was doing my studies. Who am I most likely, out of the other three panelists that are on, who am I most likely to talk to about financial issues and the financial markets? Out of the three of us, I'm most likely going to talk to Nick.
Yeah, Nick's
right? Because Nick comes from that background. He runs National Pension Partners, an absolutely fantastic company. They provide great advice, and they happen to be based in Utah. So most of the people that Nick's going to introduce me to that work for his company are going to be white. And I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact because I'm going to make generalizations here. I'm going to go with some stereotypes. Utah's the home of the Mormons. So I assume there's going to be a disproportionate amount of Mormons that Nick's going to introduce me to if I go to Utah. Does that mean that I am deliberately excluding people of color? Does that mean that I'm deliberately excluding people who aren't Mormon? I'm not a Mormon. I don't think I'll ever be a Mormon. Maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not going to say never, but I don't think that I'm ever going to be a Mormon. So does that mean that I am preferencing?
I think you will be.
White people. Well,
like you said, Jan's going to convert you. We can already see that.
That I am preferencing white
people. I'm going after you, Mark.
You'd fit right in.
Conservative values, because Nick happens to be the person most likely to be able to discuss issues to do with the finance markets, hedge funds, insurance companies, etc. What should I do instead? Should I instead say, no, let me ask you the question, because you asked about
I'm going to answer the question.
You asked about the makeup of corporate boards. What should I do instead? Should I instead say, look, Nick, you're white, so I'm not going to really talk to you because, your skin color doesn't have enough melanin in it. What I need to do is I need to go down and get some hood rat, right, whose only experience in life is dealing dime bags at the street corner and say, hey, buddy, listen, if you pull your pants up and put a suit on, I could turn you into a Swiss investment banker. And in the absence of me doing that, am I somehow, promoting white supremacy? Give me a break, Mark.
Well, Shaquille, a couple of things that you said I got to answer back to, and I'm also going to get back to something that Dan said earlier as well. First off, there's another show that exists on this network. It was actually supposed to be on yesterday, but there was some schedule conflicts and all that, but it will probably be made up either later today if we don't do 2 shows next week. But that is actually, technically speaking, and, they may have differences around the way or opinions about parts of the financial lanes and everything, but that is actually what Shirley Liu has done. Shirley Liu has actually intentionally built a company that she prides on as being diverse and everything. So the company, if you watch the ads and if you watch everything else, she actually does pride it on being diverse. And yes, she does reach out to people that are of different communities. And she does Shirley Liu, so she's Asian.
But she can be as proud of that as she wants, right? I just made an off-the-cuff comment that I don't think I'll ever be Mormon. Right. And what did Dan say? Dan said, well, I think you might be wrong. I think maybe one day you will be. Right. Fair enough. What he didn't say is, oh, no, Shaquille, absolutely. You should be Mormon because that would add diversity of skin color to our church. He didn't say that. The thought wouldn't have even occurred to him. So anybody, and you can play what I'm about to say. You can play what I'm about to say to the lady that you're referring to, and I'm happy to go on her show or have her come on this. When you say you want to build something specifically because of diversity, what you are really saying is, I want to exclude certain people
from my board,
people that would otherwise be qualified, who may actually be the best person for the job. I'm going to exclude them because they've got the wrong skin color.
That is not what you said in the least bit. That's not what you said in the least bit. But hold on a second. I got to come back to something that Dan said. Hold on a second. Hold on. I got to come to something that Dan said earlier. Because a couple of things that Dan that you said earlier that I got to respond to and all of that. Hold on, because I got a question for you when I'm going to respond. Because you said, and I know that Nick is a Mormon as well, there was a time because of some of the history of Mormonism
I didn't say what
target going after certain communities and everything because y'all wanted to make up for some of those belief systems. So I actually do have a friend, by the way, and I hear what you said about trying to recruit me to be a Mormon. One of my dear friends that I grew up with, it is one of my old friends from high school, actually is a member of the Mormon faith, as far as I know, because I think she became a member of the Mormon faith.
Mark,
after
nobody ever said anything about recruiting you to be a Mormon. Nobody ever said that.
No, Dan just said that. You did not hear the comment. Dan said that he was going after me.
He said it about me.
He said it about me. I'd be willing to share ideas and that kind of thing, but I'm not going to proselyte you, Mark, not unless you want to be.
Well, I just go about the comment you said, and my own question to respond to both of those and everything was, would you also agree, if we're going to have this conversation around Mormonism and everything, that there was a time in history when the Mormons had a very negative view? There was that whole Ham story and everything about African Americans and other minorities. Y'all then changed that view and have now also made it an effort to try to go after some of the members of that community, because I have definitely seen there are more black faces in the Mormon tabernacle choir than I've ever seen.
Mark, if you want to go into religious history, okay, the Mormons didn't get along with the Pentecostals, right? The Protestants didn't get along with the Catholics. I mean, there's been all sorts of religious fights.
There's still religious fights. Ireland is an example.
If we treated religion in the same way that you and other members of this black community that feel so oppressed all the time, if religion was treated the same way, I would have to sit here and say, Dan and Nick, my goodness, yes, you are off the Protestant branch of Christianity, but you're on a different sect of Christianity than what I am, because I've come from an Anglican branch. And certainly those of you like Chris Greco, who's a Catholic, how could we possibly get along? Because 500 years ago, there was the Spanish Inquisition, and there was all these things that happened in Europe, and etc. So I'm going to blame you. But you can't do it, Mark. You've got to let go. If you're going to let go of anything, look, if you are going to carry a grudge in life, fair enough. I don't agree. I think you should let grudges go. But if you are going to carry a grudge in life, at least make sure
I don't carry any grudge in life. I'm just saying. I'm just asking the question about.
Because of
I'm just
something
asking the
that
question
happened
about the
to you.
Okay.
skill.
Because of that happened to you.
We can use
Not something
athletes
that
as an
happened to you.
example.
Really all directed at me. Maybe I should be allowed to
Great-grandparents.
answer.
Make sure the grudge you're carrying is because of something that somebody
Unless
actually
Nick,
did
you want to
to
answer
you.
this question.
No, and like I said, the question was.
I'll put you. You're probably better at that than I am.
Bring Dan.
Okay, so listen.
Bring Dan up by himself.
There were many members of our faith that were of African American descent, both in the United States and in other countries, prior to the announcement that and the revelation that permitted the African Americans and the people of color, black people, to receive the priesthood. That was the only difference. Is that at that time, prior to that, they weren't permitted to have the priesthood. They were permitted to be members of the church, and every other way. And there were many faithful members who were. And then, but that change came by revelation to President I think it was President Kimball, after seeking to have that answer and that change for many years, because they didn't like it any more than you or anyone else, because it stunted the growth of the church in many nations. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, whole villages in Africa were joining the church prior to that, and I mean and so Africa has become a center of our religion as well, because of the principles that are taught. Do I understand why there was that issue prior to that? I don't really understand it very clearly or why. But that's not the question. Isn't what was in the past. The question is, what is the church doing now? And the church has been advocating for the Black community very strongly. They have a very good relationship with the NAACP. The church has been a very good friend to all communities of faith, and it has been very generous to many other faiths and their efforts to help alleviate the poor and those who are suffering in issues around the world. In natural disasters, they're the first to go in and help with thousands of volunteers. All peoples it doesn't matter what faith you are. That's the reputation of the church. And so, Mark, I hear what you're saying about the past, but even members of the church who have your skin color were faithful and patient. And it wasn't that there was a policy of deliberate discrimination. It was a matter of faith and understanding and revelation. So I know you don't believe that, because you are who you are and you have this race baiting thing going on all the time in your head. But that's the truth of it. And I
appreciate you telling what's going on in my head and everything. But that being said, and everything, race baiting and all of this other conversation.
You learned that from Shaquille. Mark, you don't have to think. Shaquille and Dan know exactly what you're thinking, and they'll tell you what you should be thinking. What you should be doing.
It's so brilliant. It's so brilliant.
They know what I'm thinking, and I love this whole notion of that I've been doing race baiting and everything else. So I appreciate that, Dan. I appreciate you know what's going on in my head, particularly when I'm oftentimes contemplating and thinking of thoughts.
So let me just address this. That's brilliant, Nick. Shaquille and Dan telling Mark.
Well, I don't have to think anymore. Right? I just
absolutely.
That really works
absolutely.
For us.
Now you just talk to Dan. Dan will tell you
say the
Karnak,
shock, how aghast you all were when you assumed that I should absolutely love Kamala Harris, however you want to pronounce her name, right? Because she has some ethnicity that is shared with me. And when I said I don't care about that, you were totally shocked because according to you, that's how I should think and feel. Well, she's got the same shared ethnicity as me. So even though I've spent my entire life since I've been old enough to study economics and financial theory, believing that high marginal rates of tax is not a very good way of doing things, etc., even though I spent my whole life on the other side of the political spectrum to her, I should all of a sudden give up my lifelong beliefs, not because I've been persuaded that the other beliefs are correct, but because she has the same shared ethnicity as me. So you don't seem to have any issue with telling me how I should think, but when we try to paraphrase what Mark actually said, when we try to paraphrase what Mark has actually said, you want to sit there and go, here we are talking about how he thinks and how he should think.
First of all, Shaquille, I never told you how you should think. You have the right to think any way that you want to think and everything. And that's what I've said about anybody, including other guests on other shows and everything. I've got a right to think any way they want, and I got a right to disagree with what they think on the issues. That can be a whole conversation. But the other thing that I have said is that, and this is where my conversation was going with Kamala and other people that brought it up as well, is that I also have no problem with somebody that is of the same ethnicity seeing that as a positive role model now and wanting to be the next version or maybe even a better version of Kamala Harris and all of that. That's actually where I was going with that conversation, is that if you are a poor...
Mark, you're right. My family, who don't come from a Hindu or Christian background like her family does from India, right? My family, some of whom were marched, right up to what is now Pakistan. And the family that I have from the Punjabi region and just south of there where the Gurkhas couldn't quite hold against Britain, who were shipped across to Fiji, who had to go through all of that, we're going to give up all of the things that our family might be upset about. Because somebody who has the same skin color as us, who came from the same geographical region as us, that maybe was part of a different religion, different caste, had different things going on, who may well have oppressed us, we're going to give all of that up and say, you know what? We've studied mathematics like my uncle has. We've studied nursing like all of my aunties have, nursing and medicine, the doctors, etc. We're going to give up our beliefs. We're going to give up our opinions about what the right way to tax people is, what the right things are for the economy, because somebody with the same shared ethnicity as us happens to be running for a position as VP in the United States, a country that some of our family are citizens of and many of our family are not. That's essentially what you're trying to say. If you want to talk about
race, what I'm trying to say is that
let me finish. You want to talk about race relations. You want to talk about black people. Okay, let's talk about Africans. If a Rwandan was to come to the United States and say, look, in 1997, 1 million of us died. 1 million of us Rwandians died because there was a conflict that was caused by outside forces that separated the Hutus and the Tutsis, and the conflict that ensued resulted in the death of 1 million Rwandians. Now, I happen to be a Tutsi, and I have a problem with the Hutus. And then somebody else says, well, I happen to be a Hutu, and I have a problem with the Tutsis. That voice wouldn't get heard in your America.
Well,
because in your America, the only thing that really matters is skin color. So hold
on a second.
Let me finish. You would
before you finish, I got answers to both of those.
The intergenerational hardship that's been and heartfelt conflict that has existed between the Tutsis and the Hutus. You would ignore that in order to say, well, look, Dan Worthington, I have no idea where Dan's from 10 generations ago. But you would say, look, Dan Worthington's originally his family, his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's from Norway, and his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's from, I don't know, Finland. It's probably not, but let's just go with that for the sake of my story, right? And so therefore, you guys should just agree with Obama, who's from Kenya, who's got nothing to do with the issue that happened in Rwanda, but you should agree with him because he's got the same skin color. Ignore the issues that happen within your own country. Get along with each other. And you know who we should blame? We should blame Dan because 400 years ago, Dan's family might have originated from the Scandinavian parts of Europe. And Dan, wherever your family originated from is irrelevant to the point I'm making. I'm sure you'll correct me. But that's essentially, Mark, what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. First off, that's not what I'm saying at all. I love the way that you keep trying to say what I'm saying when I know what I'm saying. And apparently you know my brains and you know what I'm saying and everything. So first off, I got to respond and then I got to get back to Dan because I want to hear Dan's response as well.
Now, wait. Now, Mark, what you're trying to do is make Shaquille those people.
I'm sorry, what I'm trying to do is what?
Make Mark's people make Shaq's people into Tootsie Rolls.
Oh, into Tootsie Rolls. Interesting concept. By the way, I was going to go to something that you said earlier on another show, Dan, and I'll get back to that in a second. First off, Shaquille,
what happened to Shaq?
I don't know.
What happened to everybody?
What happened to Shaq? He's back.
Oh, he's coming back. He's
coming back. I don't know. He's having fun. He's making things.
No. I dropped off because I was happy for you guys to talk amongst yourself. But the other answer to your question, Dan, you know what happened to me? Not much, actually. You know why not much happened to me? Because my mother, who went through the incredible poverty that she went through in her life, and her mother, who went through the incredible poverty of what she went through in her life, tried to make a better world for her children. Yep. My mother moved to Australia, and other family members of mine in the next generation up moved across. And you know where they moved to? They didn't move to Africa. They didn't move to,
they moved to Canada.
To Asia. Where they all moved to? They moved to all the New World countries. They moved to Australia. They moved to New Zealand, they moved to Canada, and they moved to the United States, predominantly in California, where they have built for themselves a better life, and their children will never know the hardships that they went through. I don't really know. My parents tell me about it. The next generation up from my uncles and aunties tell me about it, okay? But I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't feel it. I don't know what it really feels like, okay? But you know who I'm not blaming? And I'm British. When I go to the United Kingdom, I don't sit there and go, oh, this British person's family 400 years ago did this or that. I don't do that because it's one, it's pointless, and two, because all through human history, different people have done different things to other people. You want to talk about the oppression of Africans throughout history? You don't think that Europeans were oppressed? The people that you're most oppressed by generally look like you. So when you say to me, Mark, these people are so fragile, they just needed somebody that looked like them to teach them. They just needed somebody that looked like them.
There you go, putting words in my mouth. I never said that they needed white people that looked like them, dude.
You have said that show after
show. Like I said, there you go, putting words in my mouth.
Show after show. That's what you've said.
I have not said that. You've never heard those exact words come out of my mouth. You can imply that's what I'm saying, but you've never heard those exact words come out of my mouth.
I would like to remind you that when it comes to being oppressed, the people that oppress you the most are generally the people that look just like you. Right? You might think that there's been all these religious wars between the different religions. And you know what? I'll go with you, Mark. Let's pick on the Christians, okay? You might think that there's all these religious wars between different sects of Christianity, especially the Protestants versus the Catholics. There's been also, and Orthodoxes, there's been all sorts of wars. But you know what? The Catholics have picked on the Catholics more than they've picked on anyone else. right? This has been the same way throughout human history. We pick on the people around us the most, but you want to ignore that and blame the other guy.
I'm not ignoring that, and I've never denied that. But Shaquille, the other question that I was
so he told you what you're supposed to think.
Yeah, I know he keeps telling me.
No, I'm telling you what he says, Nick. I'm responding to what he says.
Right. He's going to tell you what you say, so you don't have to say anything, Mark, because he'll just have a conversation with you, but you don't.
Apparently, he likes having a conversation with himself because
now that we're on Roku, now that we're on Amazon, now that we're on all these different channels. If anybody sits here and thinks that I'm just talking shit, just go back, bring up previous episodes over the last couple of years, and replay it. And if you want to fact check me about the things that Mark has said, you can fact check me and show me where I'm wrong. Dan,
like I said, I think people will be doing that all day long. I've got other black friends that probably doing that regularly. But Shaquille, what I was going to ask you is, this is a conversation that's happened even on some of our other network events that have been going on for a while. I think now going on second or third year. If you want to talk about like things that have taken place on the network, like the Black Business Olympics that also take place here on TV and everything. Before you call the title, I didn't name it, Eric Kelly named it, but before you get into names and everything else, and it's about economic empowerment and things of that nature. But there is a conversation around Africa and African Americans, because that's a whole conversation that's been going on. And part of what happens, and you can disagree with this, is that there are some stereotypes that get played into there, and some of those stereotypes are totally unrealistic, because there are brothers and sisters, and I'll use that term, from Africa that will come here and they will think that every daggone guy that lives in the United States lives like those rappers and those athletes that you were talking about, because that's the image that they got there in Africa and everything. So that's what they think. They think that they're stepping into the land of milk and honey and all that, and that we all are living on these lovely streets and these lovely apartments and everything. And then they are shocked when they find out that that is not the case, that there's poverty throughout in both the white and other communities, because they've got this misconception going on. And the same can be said about us to Africa and everything. So there's a lot of these misconceptions that take place that are shattered, because there are people that have been trying to develop because of a affinity group, for lack of a better term, alliances that exist between, and I've seen it between India and Indian Americans, but there are folks that are trying to build alliances between the various countries in Africa, whether that's Ghana, Kenya, I can name all of them.
So it's a pretty capitalist view of people that you believe should vote for socialist Democrats, really, isn't it? These people are coming over here for all the wealth and trappings that are associated with athletes and rappers, right? But yet when they get here, you expect them to vote for the Democrats, who believe in socialism, high tax rates, and the rich are the evil of society. That's a very interesting position for these people to have.
I'm just saying, but I'm asking you because I know that you've talked before about your own financial backgrounds and your own financial hedge funding and everything. Is that wrong, in your opinion, for them to want to create affinity groups, whether it's the African Americans and the Africans, or the parts of what they call the Caribbean diaspora, because they have a like-minded connection, whether that's skin tone or whether that's whatever? But is that a wrong thing? Because I've seen both groups do that. We've actually had Barbara.
So Mark, let me answer your question this way. There are some Indians that have been incredibly successful around the world, and we are disproportionately represented. People of Indian heritage are disproportionately represented in boardrooms and etc. Okay. For me personally, I'm interested in the way the financial markets work. I'm going to study people, regardless of their skin color. I'm going to study people like Warren Buffett, like Carl Icahn, right? Like the master of the markets, the mathematical whiz of the markets, right? I'm going to study these people, not because of their skin color, but because I'm interested in what they did. What I'm not going to study is a Bollywood actor who made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars by singing and dancing. You know why? Because just because that who maybe managed to get into the United States. You know why? Because I have no intention of being a singer and dancer. I was once a singer and dancer. Wasn't very good at it, but I was once, right? But I'm not going to study somebody and go, well, because that's the way that you found your success and you have the same ethnicity as me, I'm going to study that. No, I'm going to study the things that make sense to me, that I understand, that I'm naturally good at. And I don't give a shit what the skin color of the person is that's talking to me.
I hear you don't give a shit and everything, but the flip side of that, and I've had some guests on some of my shows say this, and I don't know what Dan and others think about this, is that if the skin tone looks like you and is able to speak to you in a way that is from your perspective, meaning they've gone through some of the same things that you have gone through. Hold on a second. They've gone through some of the same things you've gone through.
No, but Mark, I addressed that before.
I'm just trying to get clarity because I'm saying that you are going to Morestown Central University, or you're going to Fisk, and you've got somebody that is like you, that is able to teach that, then that might encourage somebody else to want to be like you in that position.
But Mark, according to whom is that person like me? I just went on a big rant about the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? India has a caste system, okay? It's not something that Americans understand very well. It's not something that I understand very well because I don't go for that sort of crap, right? I think it's terrible. But if what you're trying to suggest is that somebody who's come from a lower caste, I don't. I come from a very high caste. But if somebody who comes from a very low caste in India was to come to the United States and be told that somebody who looks like them through American eyes is going to somehow be an inspiration to them, like Kamala Harris, for example, who clearly comes from a higher caste Indian family. You're expecting people that come from lower caste Indian families who have been oppressed for centuries, maybe millennia. You're expecting them to say, I'm not going to actually bring in my own cultural views on this. This person happens to share an ethnicity with me, regardless of what the oppression is. Now, if Africans were sitting there in America, if people from Rwanda were sitting there in America, and you said, look, go to a HSBU because there's going to be somebody that looks like you are ignoring what has happened prior to slavery, and you are ignoring what has happened since. Because through American eyes, all that matters is skin color. And what doesn't matter is where people came from and the experiences that they've had.
You say it doesn't matter, but I'm telling you a couple of things that you said that I would argue against that and everything. One, you said that, and I quote, America does not have a caste system, and there are people that would argue that America does have a degree of a caste system and all of that.
You can argue what you like. India has a very specific.
No, I know y'all have a specific caste system. I got that.
No,
but there are people that can argue that class and caste system.
You can try to draw analogies. You can try to draw analogies, but that's not the country that America is. America does not have a caste system like India does. That's just not true.
You can argue you can make the argument that there is a class thing, because you also talk about in some of our conversations, not so much on this show and not so much all the time in the news show, but about the inequalities that exist in economics, and that can be
No, Mark. Inequalities is not the caste system. You can make all sorts of arguments. You can argue whatever you want, right? India has a specific thing called the caste system.
No, I got that.
The United States does not. If you think there are similarities, that's fine. But you are changing the topic away from what I've
I'm not
said.
changing the topic. The other thing that I was going to get back to and everything was that
people of shared ethnicity may have generations and generations may have some resentments towards other people that have the same ethnicity as they have. And that gets ignored because of this woke bullshit that happens in the United States and Australia and Canada.
I'm going to get to the woke conversation as well. But hold on a second. But if I'm hearing you correctly, if a African-American gentleman that happens to make a success for himself in, let's just say IBM. I'm just going to use IBM as an example because we used to have them as part of our name and everything. But they make a name for themselves in IBM. They came from the projects, for lack of a better term, and projects here and projects in California are two different definitions. I would say the projects in some of the big cities are much harsher than the projects that are here in what we call the projects here, but that can be up for debate and everything. And I've never lived in those project areas, so I can only make my assumptions and everything. But my question is, if the person came from the projects, whatever those projects are, made it up to the big time in IBM? Because this is a conversation I've had with other people. Is there not a responsibility to try to come back and reach back to get other folks that have also not made it, and that concept of reaching back to get other folks that have lived in that situation? And is that, hold on a second, let me finish the question. Is that a duty that is there? Because that's part of what goes on, is that there are people that make it, quote unquote, including some of those celebrities that you were talking about earlier, like Will Smith and other things. And then the argument against them is, yeah, you came from Philadelphia. I think that's where Will Smith came from and everything. What have you done to reach back to the Philadelphia community that you came from?
Who cares?
Mark, you gloss over what I've actually said to you, right? Reach back to whom? If you are, let's just use an African example. If you're a Hutu, right, you've found success because you've come to the United States. You've found success. You reach back to your community. From the perspective of people that think that skin color is the deciding factor of what matters, that person reaching back and getting other Hutus and helping them to achieve things is a positive thing, according to what America does. The fact of the matter is that there's going to be a whole heap of Tutsis that are not inspired by this, that are resentful of this, and that are going to say, well, what about us? And because their voices don't count for anything, because they're going to be told that they're a race traitor, not because the African community or even the Rwandan community would say that, but because an American community would say that. Because African American will sit there and try to take some moral high ground. According to them, the only thing that matters is that another black person was able to find success. But whatever the issues were between these two groups gets lost by the wayside. That is what I have personally observed. Let me finish. That is what I have personally observed. That is what I have personally seen. That is what my family themselves has gone through in the United States, where family members of mine that tried to immigrate to the United States and had to wait 10 and 15 and 20 years to get their green cards, to be able to naturalize, only to be told that because other Indians who came from far wealthier families, who were not displaced like our family was by the British, they found some success in the United States. And so therefore my family is expected to all of a sudden say, oh, well, the fact that we were displaced hundreds of years ago, that doesn't matter for anything. We, in fact, are prepared to accept less treatment and less preferential treatment, in fact, to be actively discriminated against by universities, because other people from our country who may have oppressed us have found some success. Is there anything more insulting than that? So when the African American community wants to sit there and lecture the rest of us about race relations, and sit there and lecture the rest of us about how we should think and feel and how we should vote, that we should all of a sudden throw it, if you study economics, to hell with what you've studied in economics, you should support high tax rates because that's a way of solving the racial inequities of America. How insulting is that? But you guys want to sit there and say, well, what happened to us? What happened to African Americans in America is terrible, which it is. But then you want to try to make out that what happened to you is so much more terrible than what happened to everybody else that we should all disregard the things that have happened to us in our history in order to abide by some woke agenda with opinions and views and morals and things that we simply don't agree with. And I personally think that I and my family are better than that. I think that our opinions matter. And I think that we have every right to be able to express those views without being labeled as either racists, white supremacist sympathizers, or race traitors. That's
first off, I appreciate it, and you definitely let your passions be heard, and I appreciate that, Shaquille, and everything. First off, nobody ever called you a race traitor, and you keep saying that and everything, and so I love that when you use terms and try to put things in my brain and everything along those lines, and maybe other people might have said things, and yes, I have used terms that I may have said in the heat of the moment and everything along those lines, though I would never truly think of people as being tokens or things of that nature, but definitely that is a conversation that can also be addressed as well, and we can talk about that later and everything in that space. But one of the things I would also say, and this is a personal story as well, and sometimes you say that I get a little bit too caught up in the personal stories, is that if my parents are very proud of the fact of the radio station that they created in rural North Carolina, as am I, as I'm also proud of Grandma being the first African-American to create a library when there was no library for the African-American community in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she literally knocked on doors to get the money, to raise that money, because she was like, there's nobody just getting us the books that we need. So she literally knocked on those doors and created that in the 1940s, in the heart of racism and all in that space. So that is part of my legacy that I'm very much proud of, and that I brought up on other shows and everything of that nature and everything. So that being said, and all in that space and everything, I also have friends of mine that have been from other countries, and they have seen issues in those other countries, and they have chosen, that was their choice, to actually go back into those countries and reach back, like I was saying, other people might choose to do. One of my good friends, or a person that I have a great deal of respect for, is a guy named Buna Ndiaye. He is from, I believe it's Sierra Leone and all in that space. But, you know, he also has done stuff around the malaria epidemic, because there is a malaria epidemic that's been going on. We talk about all the other health issues that's going on. That is one of his. Africa has been hitting Africa for decades. And he started that here when he did it under the tutelage of John Hope Franklin, who actually was almost seeing him as his other son that was not his son, and all in that space, because John Hope does have actual kids. But John Hope Franklin is a man that lived, that studied African-American history and was proud to study African-American history and pass some of those values on to Buna and all of that. And Buna has now gone back to his home country, even though he does his show, which is a radio show, back into WNCU, that he commutes back to that area, like he sends them the tape and all of that. But he's gone back to his country because he's trying to find ways to help his country. And I think he's part of the ruling class of that country and all in that space. But that was his choice and his option to go back after he had gotten his Duke-related education. But there are other folks, and we brought this up in past shows as well, that have want to stay in the country. That's where I brought up the issue of the immigration attorney that I met. They wanted to stay in the country, but because of certain rules and regulations, they have not been able to stay in there, now being forced back. That's that whole conversation around the new form of immigration that I didn't know about, which is called the exceptional thing.
You're going way off the topic.
That's not totally going off the topic.
You are. You're going off the.
That's not totally going off the topic. I was bringing it back around, and that's what I do in my conversations. You can say I'm going off the topic, but
let me address what you've just said. I am inspired by what you have said that your mother and your family has done, starting the first radio station, etc. I think that's something that should be celebrated, absolutely, and I am absolutely there to celebrate the achievements of people who have, despite challenges they've faced, been able to achieve things. Okay, I think that is absolutely phenomenal. That's why I'm such a great supporter of the Charlotte Museum of History. Not only because they would like to move the slave school over to their grounds, but also because of some of the things that they celebrate about the Black community right there in your home state of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's fantastic. What I don't think I will ever accept and what I'll ever support is a predominantly white group of people, very wealthy, liberals, overeducated, who have had every privilege in the world, telling me that, you know what, we have just put a person of color into a particular government position, not because we thought that person was the most highly qualified, but because we thought that this would be an inspiration to you. I think that's insulting, actually. And I don't personally think that I would ever want to say to one of my nieces or a daughter, if I ever have children, say, look at this. Look at what an inspiration this is. If you work hard enough, some white person in power might give you a position, not because they care about you, your history, our family's history, or what you've achieved, but simply because you tick a check mark on a box on a checklist that they need to try to achieve. I think that's the height of an insult. The fact that we have allowed, people of color have allowed our struggles, which are different for all of us, to be politicized and used as a political pawn by people that just wish to say, well, look at what we've done. Look at how great we are, right? Like the Southern strategy. That happened. Right?
The Southern strategy happened.
How insulting, but hang on a second. I call that out, and I think it's wrong. And yeah, even people who watch these shows, I know we're well over time, people that watch these shows that have messaged in on the comments, and some of them haven't been published, and have said that I'm a race traitor to people of color. Simply because I don't think that putting some token person there and then telling the rest of us that we're supposed to support them is a good idea. I would rather support a white person who actually feels like bringing everybody up and making sure that everybody has proper opportunities. I would rather support that person than to support somebody who says, well, you know what, don't really give a shit, not really going to do anything for you, but here, look, I put a person of color in that position, and you're not black if you don't vote for me. You know, that sort of thing is totally offensive.
Shaquille, that I hear what you're saying, and that is the epitome of what is the true meaning of tokenism. But the flip side of that, and we do need to wrap this up in the near future and all of that, but the flip side of that is that if you live in Durham, North Carolina, you live in Tulsa, you live in a number of other places, you have seen what the impact can be of deliberate attacks. And you can say that it was not done deliberately. You can say that it was just a highway that was going through and it was political choices that were made, but it feels deliberate when there are thriving communities that existed. And whether it was a bombing, as was the case in Tulsa, or in Wilmington, or whether it was a highway being rammed through it, or whether it was ever that would cause the destruction. And yes, some of the destruction happened because people that were inside the group, it comes back to what you mentioned earlier, that we can be our own worst enemies. People inside the group had to take some of that money in order to approve it. And yes, it was sometimes people that were in the inner circle that got rich off of the business decision, and the rest of the folks, the hell with you and everything. But those decisions were made, and they destroyed. Hold on a second. They destroyed economic
I get
systems that were there that were very strong, and that the remnants of them are still around. Like here in Durham, I think that there are Haytop, where I work at, and it'll be there later on this evening and everything, is one of maybe 3 buildings that remain of an area that was thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that were walking around in suits and ties.
I get the gist of your question. Let me respond by this and we'll wrap up. Right. Let me just ask you this. Okay. You know that I don't fully agree with what you're saying, but let's assume that I did. Let's just assume for a moment that I agree with absolutely 100% of everything that you're saying. Why exactly is it that centre-left parties, like the Labor Party in Australia or the Democrats in the United States, have exclusivity over resolving those issues? That only they, not Republicans, but only they, the centre-left parties who believe in unions and etc., only they are the people that can speak for people of color. Only they are the people that are able to resolve all of the wounds of the past. While I'm on that topic, why exactly is it that people of color, and I'm going to especially point out the African American community of the United States, why have you guys allowed the political whims of leftist politicians in the United States to hijack the issues and turn them into something else that has nothing at all to do with the overwhelming desires of the black community? The black community is saying this. I'm just going to briefly paraphrase. Not me, you guys, the African American community says, look, we were the subject of slavery in the United States, and off the backs of our labor that was stolen from us, the United States was built. Yes, we were eventually emancipated, but we were put into slums. We've had to struggle through, and even after civil rights, we have been oppressed. We have suffered from racism. We've had a judicial system that's been against us. We've had a policing system that has been racist against us. We have not had a very good start, and we deserve to have something done to level the playing field. That is essentially, in a nutshell, what the African American community is asking for. And yet, the African American community says nothing when groups like the Sierra Club and groups that are centre-left say, oh, well, abortion, that causes climate change. And climate change hurts the black community. So therefore, we want electric cars because it helps people of colour. What sort of bullshit logic is that? If people of colour and the African-American community want to stand up for equal rights, want to stand up and point out where they have been deliberately disadvantaged because of the racism that has existed throughout US history and still exists in some way today. I can't say how much because I don't live in America. If the African American community wants to stand up for that, why exactly do they want to back candidates who say, oh, you know what we need? We need socialism. We need higher progressive tax rates. What does tax rates have to do with the black community? Oh, well, because high tax rates are going to redistribute wealth. No, the argument about tax rates is the best way about how government's going to raise revenue. Is it because of progressive tax rates or is it a more flat tax? There's whole sorts of indirect taxes, all sorts of arguments that could be had, all sorts of debates that could be had about tax rates. But the black community sits there and sits quiet and doesn't say a word when the argument about equal rights and better treatment for the black community is hijacked by centre-left parties around the world that know better and then want to insert abortion, tax rates, socialism, healthcare, etc. into that debate.
Well, first off, and you're right, we absolutely must end this and everything. But first off, I would say that the hijacking isn't just from the center left. I would also say part of that hijacking conversation goes on the whether it's around guns or whether it's around other issues, including the whole law and order debate that are hijacked from the center right or the far right or the far left. So I would agree with you that there's a lot of hijacking, and I would also agree that a lot of the money in politics. I would also agree a lot of the money in politics is an issue as well. And I would also say that nobody. Hold on a second, Shaquille. I also never said that there are not other issues.
No, Mark. No,
Shaquille. Because you brought up the Democrats versus Republicans.
Why is the black community allowing people who are only trying to serve their own self-interests, who want to sit there and say the right things? Look, I will put a token person of color into some position, and if you don't vote for me, well, you're obviously against your own skin color, you're voting against your own self-interest. That was my question. Don't worry about money. Don't worry about anything else. Why exactly has the black community, because you all want to sit there and say that I don't understand. So I'm going to tell you, I don't understand, so explain it to me.
Well,
why exactly has the black community allowed politicians and political parties to hijack the issues that are supposed to be important to us, that unify people of color around the world, and hijack them and turn them into environmental issues, abortion issues, and all these other things that have nothing to do with the actual issue at hand?
The issues have been hijacked forever. They were hijacked by freaking Kennedy.
So why allow it? So why allow it? Why
because I can tell you why they're doing it.
They're
trying to build political coalitions.
All of a sudden, I don't get the issues. Why allow it then?
I mean, Dan is correct. Is the building of political coalitions. I mean, that's the whole thing that they've been doing, and
that's what the Democrats do. They take all.
But it's not just the Democrats, Dan. Republicans got coalitions as well.
Well, they do, but the Democrats take
there are
all
coalitions that exist. There, I mean, yes, there are coalition building interests that happen. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't like necessarily what either William Barber did or here in North Carolina or what Reverend Jesse Jackson did in New York when he had the Rainbow Coalition and all of that. And now the Rainbow name has a whole different connotation. But at the time that he did it, it was about trying to build unity and having conversations around a variety of issues. And those issues need to be addressed. And those issues need to be addressed across the board.
You know something? I don't know of any Republicans that will sit there and say, hey, we've got Mitt Romney So therefore, Mormons, if you don't vote for us as Republicans, you're voting against your own self-interest because, look, we happen to have a Mormon who's a Republican. But yet when the Democrats do that, when the
Cruz does that regularly in Texas.
The black community
Cruz does that regularly in Texas.
Hey, look, fantastic. Yeah, you've got a person of color in a high-ranking position.
Hold a second, Shaquille. Ted Cruz does that regularly in Texas. Ron DeSantis does that regularly in Florida. Don't tell me that there's not efforts to pander to certain groups and everything, because that's done by not just Democrats, but it's done by Republicans as well. I just did an event that was for the Martin Luther King holiday, and you cannot tell me that Ted Cruz didn't reach out to Alan Thornton, who was doing that event, to pander toward a certain community. I know for a fact that that's why he was doing it.
Yeah. Excellent.
You cannot tell me that pandering does not exist on both sides.
No, the pandering exists mostly on the side of the Democrats.
No, it does not.
Whenever I hear it, just like when I go to a Grange night, that's one of Australia's most famous and most popular, and it's about $1,000 a bottle wines. When I go to a Grange night here in Australia, and they sit there and say, "We want to acknowledge that the land we are on originally belongs to whatever tribe, and they're the original custodians of the land," and then go on to give me a 10-minute lecture about how Indigenous women were involved in the creation of this wine some 50 years ago, I just sit there and go, first of all, stop insulting me. Secondly, stop bullshitting me, okay? Because Indigenous women were ostracized by the winemaking community, as they were in every community around Australia 50 years ago. So don't sit there and tell me they had some integral part. It's bullshit, right? Australia oppressed those women. Australia oppressed our Indigenous, or as you want to call them in America, our First Nations people. So don't sit there and play these sort of games with me and try to absolve yourself by saying, oh, we acknowledge them as being the traditional custodians of the land. Something that in America now, they're trying to say about Indian communities, right? American Indian communities, oh yeah, we acknowledge them, yeah, blah, 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 blah. It's bullshit. They don't give a shit. They don't care. And when you try to call them out for it, I just cannot fathom, I cannot understand why anybody, and you know what, play this tape back to Jacoby, play it back to Solomon and the other people that you're friends with, and tell them to come on and correct me. We'll have a whole episode. We'll have a whole episode.
We said it to Courtney, and all of that. He was definitely not on my side of the politics.
Absolutely, so. We'll have a whole episode just on this issue. Please explain to me why there is just one political party just happens to be center-left in America, and the most progressive side, the most left part of that party, is the only spokespeople of people of color. They're the only ones that can make that same argument about. It's not just in America, but it's all over the world. Only the Marxists, only the socialists, the communists, only they can talk for us.
But Shaquille, the same thing. Shaquille said, and I'll get people to come back and they can give you their opinion. But Shaquille, the same thing can be said about the Trump side of the politics on the Republicans and everything else. So they're definitely, I think that they have hijacked the Republican Party. But that's just my opinion. We're going to end this show and everything.
When have I ever said that Trump speaks for me?
But I'm saying that there are people that say that Trump speaks for them, and okay, I think more.
That's fine. That's fine. But those people that say that Trump speaks for them, Dan Worthington clearly was a supporter of Trump's or appears to be so. But Dan Worthington has never said, hey, look, if you're white and you don't vote for Trump, then you're not really white. Dan's never said that. Dan's never said, oh, look at how fantastic it is that Trump is talking for all us white people. Dan's never done that.
Well, first off, you're making an assumption. First off, you're making an assumption. I'm going to end the show on this note, and I'm actually going to toss it back to something that Dan said earlier. I was actually going to bring this up earlier and everything.
Well, before you end the show, I think Dan should have the final
word. I'm going to give Dan the last word when I make my statement. Because first off, you're making an assumption, and we're going to let Dan have the last word and everything. Because you're making an assumption because we're having this whole conversation. We've been having it for about an hour and a half around race and politics and a number of other things, but several times you have made Dan, like you say, that you are the face of conservatism. You have made Dan the face of white America, as I understand it. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to you and everything. As I recall, part of my heritage is, yes, the African American, but I also acknowledge
hold on a second. No, I'm going to interrupt you. No, because this is bullshit.
It's not bullshit. It's not bullshit.
You would sit there and say that Dad has some Native American in him. Absolutely.
Dan said that himself. Dan said that he's Native American roots.
Absolutely.
Dan, did you not say that?
I am not making Dan the face of white America because I don't care less what Dan's skin color is. Okay, Dan can sit there and say to me right now that he's wearing, makeup and actually underneath he's purple. I couldn't give a shit what his skin color is. You are the one doing that. I'm using Dan as an example because when you want to make generalizations about people of color all feeling the same way, then white people must all feel the same way.
No, and I never said that. I said several times that we are not a monolithic group. Just like I don't think that Native Americans are a monolithic group. I don't think that Hispanics are a monolithic group. You have never heard me say that we're a monolithic group. There are Black Republicans. There are Blacks that are totally on your side of politics and everything. I never said that we are monolithic.
Those Black Republicans are voting against their own self-interest, right?
No, I never said that either. So there you go putting words in my brain again and everything. When that's not what I ever said. I said we're never monolithic. Hey, Dan.
When what's his name went over, the radio reserve, mental blank on his name, went to California to challenge Gavin Newsom for the position of governor of California. He was the black face of white supremacy. Give me a break.
Corral.
Seriously, you want to try and tell me that you don't reduce everything to skin color, that Democrats don't reduce everything to skin color,
that central they don't reduce everything to skin color. There's whole conversations around crime and other things that have nothing to do with skin color and everything. But right now I'm turning it over to Dan because we're going to wrap and everything. The only point that I was making was that we have shared heritage. And who knows, maybe I'll become a Mormon one day, but that might be another shared heritage. Even though I did have a friend that was a Mormon and she was like my play sister, and Anne Franklin is a play sister. As far as I know, she's still a member of the Mormon Church. But Dan, I'm turning it over to you, my brother in the Native American culture. So I'm turning it over to you.
All right. So this has been an interesting discussion, and to some measure, it's been disheartening because of the angst about the different races in the United States. You have to remember the United States is a melting pot of many peoples from around the world. It's the land of beacon of freedom and hope for the free world. And there is no place that represents better opportunities for families to make a difference and to create something valuable for themselves than in the United States. And it doesn't matter if you're Black, you're white, you're Native American, Asian, that's still true. There is a diversity in our nation. You talk about proportionalities. Mark, for example, there's a higher proportion of people who hold federal government positions who are Black than there is in the community, the Black community. And so that's a disproportionality. So is there favoritism? Is there racism in those decisions? I don't know. There have been lawsuits over that. But, the thing is that what I think is most important about Americans is what we should be doing is talking about how we can be united and how we can make a difference in each other's lives, how we can take on ourselves the providence that God has given us in our nation to be a nation of freedom and a beacon of light to the people around the world. The behavior of our politicians and the media has undermined that vision of hope by dividing people, by creating divisions that only benefit the powerful and prevent us from being a united people against the true threats that we face around the world as a free people, and diverting our attention away from those things which are most important. We have spent, in our debating the issues that are divisive, when what we could have been doing is talking about issues that can bring us together and creating hope and direction in our society. And so I understand the different perspectives that people have. My people and I talk about not my Native American heritage at all, but my people of my faith, the Mormon, they call now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as it's always been called. They were, an extermination order was issued against them in the state of Missouri by Governor Wilbur Boggs in the early 1800s. The leader of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith, was assassinated by a mob, and he was murdered along with his brother. And in Missouri, in Carthage, in Illinois, a black-faced mob. By the way, they were trying to hide their identity, right? The Mormons actually were were anti-slavery and pro freedom for the native, for the black folks and others. And so that was one of the issues and why they were being, driven out, because of their political power. Then they in the dead of winter, they were forced to move west and cross the frozen Mississippi. Were ill prepared because the mobs were driving them out of Nauvoo, Illinois. Nauvoo, Illinois was the largest city in the state of Illinois at the time. And they literally were, and everything. Same thing happened in Independence, Missouri, because of the mobs. And then when they got to Utah and started developing success there, the United States Army was sent to try to subject them. Johnson's army, and the LDS battalion was able to hold them off and keep them in Wyoming, and cause them some uncomfortness in the winter to prevent them from coming into the valley. And a negotiation was ensued to prevent them from creating an occupation and upsetting the government of free people who had elected officials and everything. And it's all because they didn't like our views. They didn't like what we were and how we thought and how we believed. And so, you talk about discrimination, but you don't see the Mormons screaming for reparations. We haven't received our property back that was stolen from us, and never were we ever made whole for the losses in Missouri and Illinois and other places. And so, there are a lot of stories of people with oppression, right?
Many other groups, Dan, right? Even in the United States, like the Amish. What did they go through? The Quakers. What did they go
question.
through?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that, and definitely religion has been involved in that. And like I said, I don't necessarily agree with the views of some religious groups and everything, but I think that they have the right to say what they want. And there are some things that I think are totally wrong and some things that I think are literally crazy, but they've got their rights to believe them. Like I said, I've got some friends that are part of the American Muslim religion and everything. And if they want to follow either Mr. Muhammad or, because there are divisions in that church as well, or Mr. Farrakhan, who has some very radical views against European Americans and some even radical views around whether he's from this world or not from this world and everything along those lines. I'm just telling you what I've read and everything, but there's some real crazy conversations that go on there. And there's also people that are part of that Black Hebrew conversation as well, because there's some of those people that speak on the street corners and all of that.
The point that I made, and the point that I think that Dan has essentially echoed, is that many of us through our histories have been oppressed in different ways. And let me finish. And for Dan, the oppression that he can most closely relate to, from what I'm gathering, is the oppression that has occurred to members of his church and the things that have happened to Christians throughout their history. He talks more about that than he does talk about Native Americans. For me, I sit there and say, look, I'm just trying to get along and move forward in life. But if I'm going to talk about anything, I need to talk about the issues that have affected, Indians that have gone through what I've gone through, or the Anglo Indians that went to England that aren't very well accepted back in India, right? Those are real issues. And I just personally think it is incredibly wrong and insulting and dehumanizing for a group of people in the United States to suggest that only one political party or one political representative can represent their views.
No, and nobody. Well, I can only speak for myself. I can only speak for myself. Nobody's ever said that there is one. Partly because I've said that.
As I said before, if you want to bring on people that you think are able to debate this with me and put me back in my place and show me where I'm wrong, do so. If Solomon Gibson, if Jatovi, if any of the other people that you know, that some of whom thankfully are very vocal and writing comments onto our shows, if they would like to come on and show me where I'm wrong, that's fine. I'm happy to have those conversations. But for me to be lectured to and told that I don't understand the issues, or I've never experienced racism, that sort of, my family must never have been through it. For those sorts of comments to be made, and then the conclusion be that because I don't understand it, that's the reason why I don't understand why Marxism is the only way forward.
Well, Marxism was the only way forward. So to make that statement and everything is an incorrect statement.
Gender doesn't exist, and we should introduce.
Shaquille, we've gone way over and everything, but Shaquille, we've gone way over. But I'm just going to make one quick point that we've gone way over.
Let me finish my sentence. We should introduce drag queen story time to kindergarten children. But if I don't agree with that, well, the oppression that's being felt by the LGBTQ community is the same oppression that's being felt by the black community. And so therefore, I somehow don't understand racism. Again, why do we as a community, if you want to make us a community, which I don't think we are, but why do we, as people of color or as black people, this was the original question I asked, why do we allow other people with other issues that are completely different to ours? The LGBTQ community absolutely has a right to pursue their interests and to advocate for what they think is correct, to advocate for what they want and what they believe should be their liberty and what they think the Constitution allows for. But why do we need to allow all these other groups that have other interests to hijack the issues to do with race, incorporate that into their own, and then all of a sudden we have to advocate for all of it, or otherwise we're opposing everything.
Shaquille, first off, I'm not going to speak for other friends of mine and everything. I'll let them speak for themselves. But I will answer. Bring them on. I will share a conversation that I've had with friends of mine about what you just said, because part of what you just said is an argument that people make, and ironically, it's part of the reason that they create lanes that they are in and everything, because whether it is a black organization or an Indian organization or whatever, I can tell you that there are folks that are upset when they see what you just said happens, which is that because they want to address an issue, they feel that the issue is hijacked by other groups. Because I do know that there are people that have been in my circle of friends that are like, yeah, I get it. I want to make changes and I want to make positive changes for the African-American community, or maybe the African-American women community, or a number of other communities. But then they hear the LGBT community use that argument as part of their conversation and part of their narrative. So they then feel that the conversation has been, as to borrow your words and everything, hijacked. So that is a real conversation that even goes on in the African-American community, because there are people that sitting there going wait a minute, I want to address the issue.
But then to come to the crux of it, Mark, I fully respect that you're a Democrat, right? Dan's a Republican. Yeah. Now, I'm of neither party. If I was an American, as Sasha alluded to last week, if I was an American, I probably would be a Republican at the moment. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that I would be a Republican next election cycle, the cycle after, right? I'm not a partisan in my own country. I certainly wouldn't be a partisan in yours. Why is it that our community, that people of color, are basically being told that the only people that can represent their views are the Democrats? And I'm not even trying to attack the Democrats. I'm not saying that centre-left parties aren't representing us, but why do they think that the Democrats have exclusivity over this, or the Labor Party has exclusivity over this? Why do these centre-left parties? Why are they the only?
I told you before, Shaquille. It's not just center-left. I told you center-left, center-right, and center whatever ways you want to go.
I have never heard a Republican. I've never heard of a Republican, and I've never read about a Republican, at least since the Great Switch occurred, which is bullshit in my opinion. But anyway, I have never heard or read about a Republican in modern history that has said, look, we've appointed somebody who's black. We have, for example, Herschel Walker running for Senate in Georgia. And if you don't vote for him, you must hate football.
I've heard Republicans make some statements about the reason that they got
Republicans don't do that. Republicans have never gone into Utah, to my knowledge, and said, listen, if you're a Mormon and you don't vote for Mitt Romney, you're not really Mormon.
I've heard people say that about Republicans in Hispanic communities. I've heard Republicans say that too. You can't say that you've not heard that, because I have heard it, and I'm the one that's actually.
Okay, well, tell me.
So I've heard people that have made this statement about, and I've told you before, I'm not the biggest fan of what I call, and I've said it on several shows, blind voting. So definitely, I think that a lot of people get those lovely sheets, and they come from both the Republican and the Democratic side, and they are handed on folks, and they just like vote.
No, don't change something else. You name for me an example where Republicans or a centre-right party around the Western world, English-speaking Western world, in Canada,
what the hell do you think the Republicans are doing to the Hispanic community?
You name for me a time where a centre-right party has said, hey, look, let me dangle a person of color in front of you, and if you look at what we've done. Look at how amazing this is. We've got a person of color. We have this particular minority person here, and if you don't vote for him, you're voting against your self-interest, and you're not really the minority that you actually are.
What do you think the implied message is of Mr. The Lieutenant Governor here in North Carolina? What do you think the implied message is of Nikki Haley? What do you think the implied message is of the people of even Ted Cruz and everything?
Well, let me tell you something. Nikki Haley has also got some Indian blood in her, right? Yes. So she has some shared ethnicity with me. And guess what? Because I actually didn't know that. Right? So when I met her and when I was talking to Republicans, none of them actually mentioned that to me. Do you know who mentioned that to me? A Democrat. I had absolutely no idea that's where that was the ethnicity she had. And you know what? I don't care.
But I've seen.
I think that she's a great candidate, and I love some of her policies, a lot of her policies. But there's a lot that I don't. You know who else? I really think has got some great policies, and who I think is a great candidate and a great politician? Kristi Noem. I think she's absolutely fantastic. Do you know what I've got in common personally with Kristi Noem? Absolutely bugger all. Nothing. Right? She's a woman. I'm not. She's white. I'm not. She has long, beautiful brown hair. I don't have anything in common with her. But you know what? If she was my representative, I would have a look at her policies. Or if she was a candidate in my area, I'd have a look at her policies. I'd have a look at the opposing person's policies. And that's what I'd judge it on. So my question still remains. Ron DeSantis, for example. I've said multiple times, I don't think that Ron DeSantis could easily switch into federal politics. I don't think that it would just be a walk in the park for him to just jump in and run as president, either in 2024 or in 2028. I think he needs to change a couple of things because he's a very Floridian-based person who is running politics for Florida that may not work so much in federal politics. But as far as his policies are concerned, yeah, he's the guy for me. Can I have him? We'll bring Ron DeSantis over to Australia. He can be our prime minister. I think he's fantastic, personally. Okay, but I'll criticize him on the things I think he should be criticized for. Now, what do I have in common with him? Does my family come from South America like his does? No. He's married with kids and is a conservative. I'm certainly not conservative, and I'm single. I don't have any children that I'm aware of, at least. Okay, and I'm in finance, not in politics. Okay, so I don't have any.
Well, there's some people that. Well, first off,
what you want to try and do, and what your party wants to try and do, and what the Labor parties of the world try to do, is they try to say, Shaquille, I want you to forget about and ignore whatever it is that you think. You don't have a mind. You don't have a brain like Nick, the founder of this network, said, oh, Shaquille wants to think for everybody. No, I don't want to think for everybody. I'm repeating the things that you guys have said on these shows, right? Your parties want to tell me that my ability to think and reason for myself is not valid, and that the only thing I should be concerned about is whether somebody looks like me. And the more that they look like me, the more that I should support them. And I'm just going to ask the same question again, and then please replay this tape to all the people that we've previously mentioned. Why exactly do centre-left parties think that they have exclusivity over these issues? That they are the only people that can talk for us? That they are the only people that can solve the issues? If we all agree the issues exist, which we don't, but if those issues exist, why is it that it's only the centre-left? Why is it that
I've said it before, it's not only the center left, there's a whole issue around money and politics.
Is the only solution.
Nobody said Marxism was the only solution. Nobody said it was only the center left. Nobody said a number of things that you have said that were said.
Well, I'll just flip it back at you. Then name for me a centre-right party, right? Or an extreme right. Let's go for an extreme right.
I've said several times before that I am a fan of enterprise zones. Enterprise zones is a Nixon policy.
No. That is
a Nixon policy.
That's what I asked you. Name for me a centre-right party or even a very extreme right-wing party. Okay? Anywhere. Well, let's just stick with the English-speaking world, but I'll even give you all of Europe if you want it. Okay? Name for me the Labor Party, the Liberal Party of Australia, which is our Conservative Party, or, you know, the Nationals in New Zealand, okay, the Conservatives in Canada, the Republicans in the United States, the Tories in the United Kingdom. Name for me a party that is right of centre, no matter how right they are, that claims to be the only spokespeople for people of colour. Just name me one that has said that. Name me one party that has ever said, here's a person of colour, and you've got to vote for him if you're a person of color or you're not really a person of color.
First off, nobody's ever said that you had to vote for Jesse Jackson because he was just only a person of color. Hopefully you would vote for him because you liked his views and everything. So nobody said to vote for him just because he's black. That is stupid. And nobody's ever said anything. Stupid. And I'm sick and tired of you. You had to make me go off, and I knew this was going to happen. So I'm going to actually end this damn show because I'm frustrated with your ass. So thank you. God damn it.
Hang around and keep talking to me, Mark. You don't need to get frustrated. I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
I am tired of this shit.